The samurai versus the Mongols, Japan's most intense battle. The messenger's hands trembled as he delivered the ultimatum to the Japanese court. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, and ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen, demanded Japan's immediate submission. The year was 1268, and the Mongols had just conquered China, Korea, and most of the known world. Japan would be next, or so the Khan believed. What happened next would become one of history's most dramatic David versus Goliath stories, a clash between two warrior cultures so fundamentally different that their collision would reshape Japanese identity forever. The unstoppable force meets the immovable island. By 1274, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to Hungary, an unprecedented dominion that had crushed every army foolish enough to resist. Their military innovations were legendary: composite bows that could pierce armor at 200 yards, coordinated cavalry charges that moved like a single organism, and perhaps most terrifying of all, explosive weapons that sounded like thunder and rained fire from the sky. The samurai, meanwhile, had spent centuries perfecting an entirely different art of war. These Japanese warriors lived by Bushido, a code that emphasized individual honor, face-to-face combat, and announcing one's name and lineage before engaging an enemy. A samurai's bow was not just a weapon, it was an extension of his soul. His sword carried his family's honor across generations. Here's what neither side understood. They were about to fight history's first documented example of traditional warfare colliding with total war. The samurai fought for glory. The Mongols fought to win. The first invasion, when honor met horror. On November 19, 1274, a fleet of nearly 900 ships carrying 23,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean warriors appeared off the coast of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost main island. The defenders watched in confusion as the vessels approached. These weren't the ships of traders or diplomats. These were instruments of conquest. The samurai rowed out to meet them at Hakata Bay, confident in their centuries of martial tradition. What happened next must have seemed like sorcery. The Mongol forces didn't wait for formal challenges or ceremonial declarations. They didn't line up for honorable single combat. Instead, they unleashed a symphony of coordinated destruction that the Japanese had never imagined possible. Mongol cavalrymen moved in perfect formation, feinting and flanking with practiced precision. Their arrows fell in dense clouds, not aimed at individuals, but at masses of men. And then came the Tetsuhou iron shell bombs packed with gunpowder that exploded with earth-shattering noise, terrifying horses and shattering the samurai's psychological advantage. One Japanese account describes the horror. The sound was like thunder. The flash was like lightning. Men and horses were thrown into confusion, and many fled. The samurai warrior Suenaga Takazaki later commissioned a detailed scroll depicting his experiences. In one scene, he charges alone toward Mongol lines, bow drawn, ready to announce his pedigree. In the next scene, he's surrounded by arrows and explosions, his heroic gesture meaningless against an enemy that didn't play by his rules. But then something extraordinary happened. The Divine Wind, version 1. Just as the Mongols were consolidating their beachhead and preparing to advance inland, their commanders made a fateful decision. Reports vary on the reasoning. Some say they were concerned about supply lines. Others suggest they feared a nighttime counterattack. Whatever the cause, the Mongol fleet retreated to their ships for the evening. That night, a violent storm struck the Tsushima Strait. Waves smashed the tightly packed invasion fleet against itself. Hundreds of vessels sank or were damaged beyond repair. By morning, thousands of Mongol warriors had drowned, and the survivors limped back to Korea. The Japanese called it kamikaze, the divine wind. The gods, it seemed, had saved Japan from the unstoppable Mongols, but Kublai Khan wasn't finished, not even close. 7 years of dread. Imagine living under the shadow of inevitable doom for 7 years. That was Japan's reality between 1274 and 1281. The samurai knew the Mongols would return, and they knew the gods might not save them twice. The Japanese threw everything into preparation. They constructed a massive stone wall along Hakata Bay. Some sections still stand today, a testimony to their desperation. Stretching for miles along the coastline, this 6 to 9 foot barrier was designed to prevent cavalry landings and provide defensive positions for archers. The samurai also adapted their tactics. They studied what had worked and what had failed during the first invasion. Individual glory was fine in peacetime, but survival required group tactics. They organized night raids, prepared ambush positions, and stockpiled arrows by the tens of thousands. Meanwhile, Kublai Khan was assembling something unprecedented, the largest amphibious invasion force in history until World War II's D-Day, nearly 7 centuries later. The second invasion, hell and high water. In 1281, 2 massive fleets converged on Japan. The Eastern Route Army sailed from Korea with 40,000 troops and 900 ships. The Southern Route Army departed from China with an almost unbelievable 100,000 soldiers on 3,500 vessels. Together, they represented the full might of the Mongol Empire, supported by the entire industrial capacity of conquered China and Korea. This time, the Japanese were ready. When the Mongols attempted to land, they found the coastal wall blocking their cavalry's path to glory. Samurai archers, positioned behind the fortifications, rained arrows on the exposed invaders. Small, mobile Japanese boats, too nimble for the Mongols' massive vessels, darted in for night raids, setting fires and cutting anchor lines. For weeks, the battle raged along the coast. The Mongols established some footholds on offshore islands, but couldn't break through to the mainland. Their fleet remained crowded together in the bay, waiting for the breakthrough that never came. And then, on August 15, 1281, the gods, or meteorology, intervened again. The typhoon that changed history. A typhoon of catastrophic proportions slammed into Kyushu. For 2 days, winds exceeding 100 miles per hour tore through the Mongol fleet. The massive Chinese and Korean vessels, designed for rivers and coastal waters, not open ocean storms, snapped like kindling. Ships crashed into each other, into the rocky coast, into the seafloor. When the storm finally passed, bodies and wreckage covered the water for miles. Modern underwater archaeology has discovered the scattered remains of this doomed armada, including ship timbers, anchors, weapons, and the bones of warriors who had conquered half the world, but couldn't conquer Japan. Contemporary accounts suggest that between 60% and 90% of the invasion force perished, possibly over 100,000 men. It remains one of the deadliest military disasters in human history. The aftermath: a nation transformed. The Mongol invasions failed militarily, but they succeeded in transforming Japan in ways the Khan never anticipated. The concept of kamikaze became central to Japanese identity. The idea that Japan was protected by divine favor, that the islands were sacred and inviolate. This belief would echo through Japanese culture for centuries, reaching its most tragic expression in World War II. The samurai emerged changed as well. They had learned that honor without adaptability meant death, that individual glory was meaningless if the nation fell. The Bushido Code evolved to incorporate pragmatism alongside valor. Kublai Khan never attempted a third invasion. The cost had been too high, even for the world's richest empire. Japan remained unconquered, the only major nation to successfully resist Mongol expansion. The question that haunts history. Here's what keeps historians up at night. What if there had been no typhoons? Could medieval Japan have withstood the full might of the Mongol Empire without divine intervention? We'll never know. But we do know this: the samurai fought with everything they had, adapted when adaptation meant survival, and held the line long enough for fortune to favor them. In the end, perhaps that's what victory always requires: courage, preparation, and just enough luck to see another sunrise. The stone walls still stand at Hakata Bay, silent witnesses to the time when Japan faced the apocalypse and survived. The samurai learned that the greatest honor wasn't in dying gloriously, but in living cleverly enough to win. And the Mongols learned that some islands, protected by warrior spirit and the capricious favor of the wind, simply could not be conquered. The divine wind had spoken twice. The message was clear. Japan would remain Japanese.